Hello everyone, I am Mithuraaj Dhusiya from University of Delhi, India, and today I'll be speaking upon Indian horror cinema. I'll try to tell you all how Indian horror cinema is different from other horror cinemas across the globe and what is so special about it. Well, to begin with, when we talk about Indian horror cinema, it's not Indian horror cinema, but it's actually Indian horror cinemas. Because unlike, let's say, Italian horror films or Thai horror films or Japanese horror films or even any Hollywood specific horror films, when we talk about Indian horror films, basically we mean Indian cinemas. So, horror films are produced in multiple languages in India, be it in Hindi, which is most popularly known as Bollywood, or be it in Bangla, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and even many languages in the northeastern part of our country. So what is important to know that there is nothing called Indian film industry, because there is always something called Indian film industries in the plural sense of the term. So that makes it very interesting, because each film industry within our country will be actually focusing upon horror as generated through the cultural specific tropes within the country. Right. So, for example, Malayalam horror films in Kerala would be focusing upon the Kerala folklores, Kerala folk tales, and similarly in Bengal, you will have Bengali stories, Bengali horror. So, it actually refers. So, what it makes very interesting that there is never a homogeneous presentation of things as far as horror films are concerned. Straight away from then, when you focus upon different types of ghosts that are there, well, traditionally speaking, a classical Hollywood horror film would basically try to show how the victim, as it were, is possessed by Satan or Satan's followers, right? So it's the devil versus the god. That seems to be the major thing in most classical Western horror films. But when you focus on Indian horror films, much like the South Asian counterparts, much like the Japanese horror films, but in a very, very different way, we have spirits of ghosts or spirits of deceased women who were tortured, and then they come back and possess the body of course, the female protagonist, to extract revenge from those people who harmed them. Right. So this seems to be the basic horror trope in almost many Indian horror films. Right. So there is not a classical ghost devil versus the god dialectic. It moves beyond that, and therefore we have different types of ghosts. Right. For example, there is something called Yakshi, the figure of Yakshi, or Chudail, or Petni, Bhoot. So in different parts of the country, whatever ghosts are traditionally known in their folk tales, we have the such presentation over there. Then what makes more interesting is that Indian horror films, much like Indian cinema, present intersection of caste, class, sexuality, and of course the whole idea of religion, right? So sometimes you will have ghosts of, let's say, a Muslim woman or a Muslim man possessing a body of the victim. Sometimes it would be the lower caste victim who would extract revenge through that. Sometimes you will have the transgender spirit, spirit of the transgendered person who was killed, and therefore the person comes back, the spirit of the person comes back to extract revenge upon it. So in that sense, it's not merely racism over here or racial context described over here, but other things are also there. And the last thing, well, much like most of Indian horror films or most Indian cinemas, Indian horror films also have their shares of songs and dance. Unlike Western horror films, where Western cinema has musicals, right, where it is totally dedicated to songs and dances, but not so much in other films, right, mainstream Western films. But Indian horror films also have their songs and dances, which adds to the plot and the story of the film. Yeah.